Some people think they can break you, vanish, and never face a consequence. But the universe doesn't forget. It records everything. Ever wondered what really happens to the people who betray you? The story doesn't end when they walk away. It begins in silence. Karma isn't loud. It doesn't knock on the door. It whispers at 2 a.m. when there's nowhere left to hide. They thought they could hurt you and walk away like nothing ever happened. They believed you would fall apart, lose yourself, or spend the rest of your life plotting revenge. But here's what they never saw coming. The universe has a memory. Every betrayal, every lie, every scar they left on your soul becomes a seed planted in the soil of their own undoing. You didn't need to fight back, because something greater has already been fighting for you. Not with noise, not with chaos, but with silent justice. This isn't simple karma. This is divine correction unfolding slowly, quietly, and in ways they will never anticipate until it's far too late. The first consequence for people who hurt you isn't public embarrassment or financial loss. It's the quiet collapse of their own peace of mind. They thought they could betray you, use you, lie to you, and walk away untouched, like none of it mattered. But the first battlefield they lose isn't out in the world. It's inside. No one escapes their own conscience. You can block their number, delete their photo, avoid the places that remind you of them, but they can't delete their own memory. They can't outrun their thoughts. And they absolutely cannot silence their conscience when it starts to whisper at 2 a.m. when the world is asleep. And there are no distractions left to numb the guilt. That's when the cracks begin to show. Sure, they might laugh with friends, post happy updates online, and pretend everything is perfectly fine. But deep down, they feel it. A growing discomfort they can't explain. An anxious pulse under the skin. A heavy silence behind the smile. Here's a real story. A woman once shared how her closest friend abandoned her during the darkest chapter of her life. That friend never apologized. She just disappeared. At first, she acted untouched. But months later, she admitted to mutual friends that she couldn't sleep. Not because of drama, not because of consequences, but because of guilt. Every time she heard a song they used to love, passed a familiar street, or saw a quote about loyalty, the memory returned like a ghost. No punishment was needed. The mind punished itself. Your silence becomes the mirror they can't look away from. You didn't clap back. You didn't fight dirty. You simply went quiet. And that silence echoed louder than any confrontation ever could. Because silence doesn't scream, it reflects. When they look at your silence, they see everything they lost. They see the person they became. And suddenly, the questions they've been trying to bury start rising to the surface. Why did I do that? What if I was the problem? Did I destroy something I'll never find again? That's not just regret. That is the beginning of internal collapse. This is emotional intelligence in motion. When you have emotional intelligence, you understand you don't have to argue to prove someone wrong. You don't need revenge to feel powerful. You simply let people deal with the consequences of violating your peace. And believe this, the loss of inner peace is the universe's first warning shot. Sleepless nights, restless thoughts, quiet moments when the truth becomes impossible to run from. Sometimes the loudest consequence is still silence. The people who hurt you may not show it, but they feel it. At first, it's just a passing thought, a little flash of memory they try to shake off. Then it turns into a recurring dream that keeps returning night after night. Eventually, they begin to dread being alone, because in those moments of quiet, your name appears in their mind and they feel the full weight of what they did. They can deceive everyone around them. They can put on a perfect mask for the world, but they can't fool themselves. Not forever. This isn't revenge. This is nature doing what nature always does, correcting. In Stoic philosophy, every action comes with a consequence. Maybe not immediately, maybe not dramatically, but always inevitably. When someone hurts a person who was real with them, someone loyal, kind, genuine, they don't just lose that relationship. They lose part of their own peace. Suddenly, the energy that person brought is gone. The blessing they used to have surrounding them quietly disappears, and that emptiness begins to echo like a wake-up call. And there is something for us to learn from this too. Your peace is your greatest currency. Protect it. Don't waste it trying to prove you were right. Don't shatter it just to make them feel guilty. Walk away silently, powerfully, with dignity. Because when peace begins to crumble in their life, when their own conscience becomes their punishment, you'll recognize that something bigger than you is already working, and it is doing a far better job than revenge ever could. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when life starts quietly shutting doors for those who use their free will to cause harm. It doesn't arrive with a thunderstorm or a dramatic warning. It comes subtly and relentlessly. They think they're still in control, still winning, still untouchable. But behind the curtain of their ego, life is recalibrating, enforcing the law of withdrawal. When someone intentionally hurts a good person, they don't just harm that individual. They interfere with a greater energy. They touch what should never be violated: loyalty, trust, love, and human dignity. And when that line is crossed, the universe doesn't respond with rage, but with silence and strategic removal. Opportunities dry up. Relationships grow cold. People distance themselves for reasons no one can explain. It's not always punishment. Sometimes it's simply alignment. Life stops supporting someone who betrayed its own design. No door stays open forever. They may laugh for now, convinced they got away clean, but slowly, one by one, the doors that were once open start to close. The job offer they counted on disappears. The loyal friend they manipulated becomes distant. Admiration turns into suspicion. What was once easy suddenly feels full of resistance. They'll blame bad luck. They'll blame timing. But deep down, some part of them knows this is fallout. A quiet storm, perfectly timed. Have you ever watched someone who once had everything, respect, influence, opportunity, suddenly lose their footing? People say they changed, or that their energy feels off. But no, it's not that they changed. It's that truth finally caught up with them. The weight of dishonor always catches up. Sometimes it arrives as a lost contract, a sudden illness, a betrayal they never saw coming, or a strange series of misfortunes. Not as revenge, but as recalibration. They thought it was about you. It never was. When someone wrongs you and walks away, they assume the story ends. They assume their future stays intact because you stayed quiet, or because you chose healing over retaliation. But the truth is, you were the test, not the target, not the threat. The test of whether they would honor what was sacred, and they failed. Now life begins removing them from paths they were never meant to walk, not out of cruelty, but to protect others from the same damage. This is emotional intelligence in action. Observing without needing proof, paying attention without demanding evidence. When you have emotional intelligence, you don't obsess over how karma will unfold. You don't need to witness their downfall. You simply watch the doors. Soon, you'll notice the subtle shift. They don't smile like they used to. They start repeating the same patterns of dysfunction. They sabotage their own progress again and again. They feel stuck, confused, and unable to understand why. This isn't coincidence. This is cause and effect operating on a level they can no longer perceive. Nature teaches the clearest lessons. Think of a tree whose roots have already rotted. On the surface, the branches may still look green. The leaves may still sway in the wind, but underground, the decay has begun. One day, without warning, it collapses because what sustained it from within no longer exists. That is what happens when someone loses the protection that once surrounded them because of your presence. You weren't just a part of their life. You were a blessing holding things together. And once they betrayed that blessing, the root began to rot, silently and steadily. Don't knock on a door they locked from the inside. Let this be a warning for you too. When life removes someone from your path after they hurt you, do not chase them. Don't knock on closed doors. Don't interfere with divine correction. Because if you try to reattach what life is trying to release, you'll end up absorbing the fallout meant for them. Stay still. Stay silent. Let the doors close. It's not an ending, it's protection for you and accountability for them. At first, they feel untouchable. They walk away from what they did to you, convinced it's over, believing that your silence is weakness, that your refusal to fight back means they won. But what they don't realize is that life is setting up a mirror. And when it's ready, it won't just show them who they've become. It will make them feel everything they made you feel. Life doesn't always use punishment. It uses reflection. The most divine justice isn't loud. It's not thunder, wrath, or fire raining down. It's this: you betray love, life shows you what it feels like to be unloved. You lie, life surrounds you with deception. You abandon someone loyal, life makes you feel forgotten. They won't see it coming, but when it arrives, they'll begin asking desperate questions. Why does everyone treat me like this? Why can't I find someone who really stays? Why do people keep using me? The answer isn't in the world around them. It's buried in their past. What they did to you becomes their new reality. They made you feel invisible. Now no one sees them. They made you doubt yourself. Now they live in constant self. They played with your emotions. Now they are surrounded by people who don't take them seriously. They taught life how to teach them, and life listened. They mocked your silence. Now theirs is unbearable. You sat in silence, trying to heal, trying to make sense of pain that never should have been yours. They mocked your withdrawal, laughed at your introspection, called you weak, overly emotional, too sensitive. Now they live in silence too, but not the peaceful kind. Their silence is haunted. They replay old conversations, reread messages that once meant everything, revisit places where they felt your energy, except this time you're not there. The silence that once empowered you has now become the silence that condemns them. When emotional consequences hit harder than physical ones, there are wounds money can't fix, pains no apology can soothe. And when someone begins to experience what they once caused, the impact isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. It eats away at their soul slowly, because deep down they know the truth. This is exactly what I did to someone who genuinely cared about me. That realization doesn't just hurt. It can reshape them if they're humble, or destroy them if they're proud. It's a pattern only they can see and fear from the inside. Other people might not notice a thing, but they do. They notice it in how no one believes them anymore, in how their relationships suddenly feel shallow, surface level, empty, in how people walk away without closure, without explanation, just the way they once did to you. It's a pattern only they can trace back to its beginning, and that beginning is you. More precisely, what they did to you, the gift of silent transformation. Here's something you need to understand. You didn't need to curse them. You didn't need to fight them. You just needed to survive the storm they caused, so one day they would walk into a storm of their own. And when they do, they'll realize something chilling. I created this. Not you, not karma, them. And that mirror, it never lies. It doesn't flinch. And it never shows mercy to the unrepentant. So don't stand there watching the mirror judge them for you. You don't need to witness their downfall. You don't need to analyze how the karma arrives. Because the more you look back, the more you become part of their story again. Let the mirror do what it was made to do, and let your growth be the only reflection you care about. You are not the person they hurt anymore. You're not stuck in that chapter of your life. You're moving forward with quiet confidence and an inner peace they may never touch again in the beginning. They didn't see that. Or maybe they refused to. They thought you were ordinary, replaceable, always there, always kind, always forgiving. But now that you're gone, now that your presence has turned into absence, everything feels different. They don't miss you because you begged. They don't regret it because you punished them. They miss you because life simply doesn't feel the same anymore. And for the first time, they realize I didn't just lose a person. I lost a blessing. That's the difference between attention and presence. They thought you were just another person in their life, someone to pass time with, to lean on, or even control. But your value never came from the noise you made. It came from the peace you brought, from the way your presence calmed the room, from the way the future felt a little less heavy when you were there. You didn't demand attention. You offered stability. You didn't manipulate. You uplifted. Now the people around them feel different, shallow, conditional, restless. They look back and wonder, why did I feel so safe back then? Why was I a better version of myself when they were in my life? They'll never admit it out loud, but deep down they know you were the anchor. You were the quiet light in their storm. They mistook your calmness for weakness. They mistook your forgiveness for foolishness. They mistook your consistency for naivety. But what they never understood was this: your strength was quiet. Your kindness was not desperation. Your loyalty was not blindness. It was intentional, chosen, rare. And now that they've gone through people who offer drama instead of peace, validation instead of truth, possession instead of love, they finally see the difference. It hits them like an echo that won't fade. I had something sacred, and I destroyed it. The illusion of options disappears quickly. There's a cruel trick the ego plays. It convinces people there is always someone better out there. That if someone holds them accountable, that person is too much. That if someone walks away, they'll find better energy. But reality settles in silently. And what they lost will never quite return the same. They do get better for a little while. At least until they meet people who mirror their dysfunction instead of healing it. Until the day they finally realize admiration without depth means nothing. Until they're surrounded by those who want what you gave, but aren't willing to become who you were. And that, right there, is when it hits them, the truth they avoided for so long. They didn't just lose a person. They lost the peace that person carried. And peace isn't something you can fake. It's something you feel when the right soul is near. A real example: the friend who woke up too late. One man shared a story about a woman he used, mocked, and ignored. She was always kind, always patient, even when he was cruel. Eventually, she walked away. No drama, no revenge, just silence. Years later, after a string of failed relationships, betrayals, and inner collapse, he said, "I thought she was boring, but she was the only one who truly cared. The only one who gave without expecting anything. I was too blind to see she was the blessing." He tried reaching out, but her number had changed. She had outgrown the version of herself that allowed his presence. She didn't hate him. She just healed beyond his reach. Why silence is the final proof of value. There's something haunting about being ignored by someone who used to care deeply, not because they're being cruel, but because it proves they've elevated to a space where your chaos no longer has access. Your silence isn't punishment. It's evolution. It quietly declares, "I was the blessing, and now I've withdrawn that blessing." They'll feel it when they try to replicate your energy and fail. They'll feel it when they meet people who only give what they're trying to get. They'll feel it in restless nights, unfinished conversations, and unsent messages. Let them learn without you. You were the warmth in winter, the calm in the storm, the clarity in their confusion. But now, they're left with what they chose, a life without your light. And here's the most powerful part. You don't need to say a single word. You don't need to watch them spiral. You don't need to update them on how well you're doing. Your absence says everything. It says you had something pure. You mishandled it, and now it's gone. Not out of hate, but out of self-respect. You didn't have to lift a finger, didn't have to expose them, didn't have to seek revenge. Because life, patient and precise, has a way of returning the very experience they put you through, wrapped in a different disguise, one they cannot escape. It's not about punishment. It's about reflection. And the lesson always lands harder when it arrives dressed like their own behavior. The setup is quiet. The impact is brutal. They made you feel small. Now they're being belittled. They made you feel invisible. Now they're being ignored. They exploited your empathy. Now they're being used by someone who fakes it better. And here's the twist. They don't even realize it at first. At first, they feel drawn to someone new, thinking, "This is exciting. This feels powerful." But it's not power, it's familiarity. They've simply met a version of themselves. They begin to taste the same bitterness they once served you. It becomes an emotional trap they simply can't escape. You remember exactly what it felt like, the constant confusion, doubting your worth, waiting for clarity that never came, being blamed for things you didn't do. Now, they're the ones living in that fog. Suddenly, they're unsure if they're too much, not enough, or if the people around them secretly resent them. Welcome to the emotional chaos they once created. It's not fun when the mirror doesn't flatter, and it's terrifying to realize you're trapped in the same cycle of pain you once set for someone else. Why karma doesn't show up in the way they expect. They expect karma to look like a car crash, a scandal, a dramatic fall from grace. But karma is far more sophisticated than that. It sends them someone who uses their insecurities against them. Someone who makes them question their value, praises them in public, but undermines them in private. Someone who love bombs them, then suddenly goes cold and withdraws emotionally right when they start to care. And just like that, They find themselves chasing closure from someone who mirrors everything they once were. It's poetic and painfully precise, because there is nowhere to hide from yourself. The moment of realization doesn't hit all at once. It builds slowly, silently. One morning, they wake up feeling exhausted, not from work, but from emotional weight. And then the thought finally creeps in, wait, is this how I made them feel? The shame is quiet but deep, and it lingers, especially because they can't apologize to themselves. They might try to apologize to you, but by then you've grown too far. You're no longer available to validate their awakening. You've become untouchable, not out of spite, but out of evolution. You were the lesson they never saw coming. In hurting you, they thought they were in control. But life made you their mirror, their reckoning, their unspoken teacher. Now, every time they get mistreated, every time they're ghosted, dismissed, or manipulated, they're reminded of you. Not because you're doing anything, but because their own actions have found their way back home. That's karma, not revenge, just a deeply personal education in emotional intelligence. Why you don't need to witness it. Let go of the urge to check up on them, to see if they're suffering, to track the ripple effect. Emotionally intelligent people don't need proof. They understand what you do to others, especially to those who only meant you well, always comes back. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but always precisely so. Instead of watching their karma unfold, focus on your peace, your new boundaries, your quiet confidence. Let their storm rage while you build something stronger, your strength. Remember, you didn't become what hurt you. That's what makes you powerful. You didn't mirror their cruelty. You didn't become bitter, manipulative, or cold. You healed, you grew, and now you're the version of yourself they could never break. And that realization that you made it out while they stayed trapped in their own cycle is the most humbling consequence of all. There's something uniquely frustrating about watching someone hurt you and then walk away as if nothing happened. Smiling, thriving, praised by others, untouched by the wreckage they left behind. You sit there, heartbroken, mind spinning, wondering, do they ever pay for what they did? Do they just get to walk away? But that's where most people misunderstand the nature of divine justice. It doesn't show up on your timeline. It shows up when it teaches the deepest lesson. And when it arrives, it doesn't whisper. It changes their entire life. Why doesn't justice come early? If justice showed up the exact moment someone hurt you, they would never truly understand what they did. They would brush it off as bad luck, make excuses, or blame another person. Maybe they'd even call it karma for some unrelated mistake. But when it arrives later, after they've convinced themselves they were right, after they've settled comfortably into the illusion of winning, after they've forgotten how they treated you, that is when it lands with real force. Because when justice finally comes, there's no confusion left, no one else to point fingers at, no coincidence to hide behind, just silence, clarity, and a reckoning they can't escape. The delay is not punishment. The delay is protection. You might think that justice delayed is justice denied, but sometimes that delay is for your own growth. If karma had appeared instantly, you might have stayed in their world just to witness it. You would still be emotionally tied, constantly looking over your shoulder, needing to see them fall to feel complete. But now you've outgrown the need to watch. You've traveled so far emotionally that you simply don't care anymore, and that's why it works so perfectly. The moment you stop needing closure, the moment you stop obsessing, over consequences. That's usually when it happens, almost quietly. And ironically, you won't even feel joy. You'll just feel confirmation. A quiet, subtle knowing. Life is not running on your clock. It moves on a divine rhythm. We live in a world addicted to speed, fast answers, fast results, fast karma. But spiritual justice doesn't operate like a vending machine. It works like seasons. There is a planting season, a growing season, a silent season, and finally, a harvest season. What they did planted seeds, but fruit always takes time to ripen. And when it finally ripens, it doesn't just show them what they did. It forces them to face who they've become. Isn't that far more powerful than any quick revenge? You don't need to be present to witness it. Maybe you imagine one day they'll call and confess everything, ask for forgiveness, or admit their mistakes. But here's what really happens. They sit in silence, too ashamed to reach out. They think of you in moments they can't explain. They see your name, your face, your energy in every act of kindness they will never receive again. And they carry that weight alone. Because that's what divine justice does. It isolates those who never valued connection. There's a real story. The one who laughed too soon. A woman had a husband who left her for someone more exciting. He gloated on social media, bragged about his upgrade, publicly humiliating her. She stayed silent. She rebuilt her life and healed privately. 5 years later, his new relationship collapsed. He was left completely alone, bankrupt, estranged from his own children. She never replied to his messages, not because she hated him, but because she no longer lived in the same emotional universe. She said, "By the time life gave him what he deserved, I no longer needed to see it. I had my peace, and that was enough." That is emotional intelligence. Let the delay humble you, not break you. When justice takes its time, don't let bitterness rot your spirit. Don't assume silence means God, life, or the universe forgot about you. Instead, use that waiting to build spiritual discipline, emotional resilience, psychological clarity, and an unshakable sense of self-worth that nobody can steal. Because when justice finally arrives, it will not only deal with them, it will elevate you. When justice finally arrives, you'll hardly notice, because by then, you've already outgrown the pain. And that's the quiet beauty behind the divine delay. By the time the people who hurt you face their consequences, you won't be waiting in the shadows, counting days. You'll be too busy thriving, too focused on building something real. And maybe, just maybe, when the truth hits them, they'll look at your name, shake their head, and whisper, "I shouldn't have treated them like that. That person was a blessing, and I lost it forever." Sometimes, what feels like rejection is really redirection. What feels like abandonment is actually protection in disguise. You thought they left you. You thought that door slammed shut because you weren't enough. But what if it wasn't their decision? What if God removed you first? You didn't walk away, you were pulled out. There are moments in life that don't make sense when they happen. A relationship ends abruptly. A promising opportunity slips away without warning. A trusted friend switches sides. A betrayal hits you from behind. You blame yourself, replaying every detail like a movie stuck on repeat. You think, maybe if I did more, maybe if I gave more. But here's the truth. You were never meant to stay there. You were being removed from a space that would have slowly destroyed your spirit. You just couldn't see it yet. God hears conversations you weren't present for. You don't know what they said about you behind closed doors. You didn't see the traps they planned or the way they laughed while you were crying. But God saw it. He hears the things you never would have believed. He sees patterns you were too loyal to question. And instead of sending more signs, He gave you an exit. It may have felt sudden, harsh, even confusing, but it was surgical, precise. You were removed from poison before it could reach your soul. It didn't fall apart. It fell into place. We often pray for peace, for clarity, for strength. But we rarely understand that to receive those blessings, some structures in our lives need to collapse. And when they do, we panic. Yet here's what you must remember. Your prayer was heard. You just didn't recognize the answer. The friendship ended. The relationship broke. The connection died. But your peace began. Your clarity increased. Your soul started healing. That isn't a loss, that's deliverance. Here's a real example, a confession wrapped in regret. She disappeared before I could ruin her. A man once admitted. There was a woman who loved him deeply, consistently. He was selfish. He used her emotions, lied, manipulated, and took advantage. But before he could destroy her entirely, she vanished. She went no contact, no explanation, no dramatic goodbye, no return. He said, "Now I understand. She didn't just leave me. God pulled her out before I could damage something I wasn't qualified to hold. She didn't wait for the final blow. She was rescued before it landed." Spiritual discipline is trusting the exit without needing closure. Sometimes the hardest thing is to trust the silence, to trust the unanswered prayer, to trust the door that shut without warning. But real faith doesn't demand understanding. It moves forward anyway. You don't need to know why it ended. You don't need to know what they said. You don't even need an apology. What you truly need is to trust that your protection was prioritized over your comfort. God removed you, not because you were weak, but because you were precious. Your absence became your salvation. The moment you disappeared from their life, they lost access to your grace, your loyalty, your light. They didn't notice in the beginning, but eventually, when things stopped feeling right, they understood something sacred had been withdrawn. When justice finally arrives, you'll almost miss it, because by then you've already grown past the pain. And that is the quiet beauty of divine delay. By the time the people who hurt you begin facing their consequences, you won't be waiting around, checking to see whether life got them back. You'll be too busy thriving, building something healthier. And maybe, just maybe, when they finally realize what's happening, they'll look at your name, shake their head, and whisper, "I shouldn't have treated them like that. That was a blessing, and I lost it forever." Sometimes what you call rejection is really redirection. And what you think is abandonment is actually protection in disguise. You thought they walked away. You thought the door closed because you weren't enough. But what if it wasn't their decision at all? What if God removed you first? You didn't leave, you were pulled out. There are moments in life that make no sense when they happen. A relationship ends out of nowhere. A job opportunity disappears. A friend you trusted suddenly turns their back. A betrayal cuts you from behind, right when you least expected it. You blame yourself, replaying every moment like a broken record. You think, maybe if I did more, maybe if I gave more. But here's the truth you often forget. You were never meant to stay. You were being removed from a space that would have slowly destroyed your spirit. But you couldn't see it yet. God hears conversations you weren't there to witness. You don't know what they said about you behind closed doors. You didn't see the traps they tried to set. You didn't hear the way they laughed while you cried, but God did. He hears the things you never would have believed. He sees the patterns you were too loyal, too forgiving, too hopeful to question. And instead of giving you another sign, He gave you an exit. It may have felt harsh, sudden, even violent, but it was surgical, precise. You were removed from poison before it could reach the core of your soul. It didn't fall apart. It fell into place. We pray for peace, for clarity, for strength. Yet we rarely understand that to receive those blessings, something in our lives has to collapse. And when collapse comes, we panic. But here's what you must remember. Your prayer was heard. You just didn't recognize the answer. The friendship ended. The relationship broke. The connection died. But your peace began. Your clarity grew. Your soul started healing. That's not loss, that's deliverance. Here's a real example, spoken by a man full of regret. She disappeared before I could ruin her. There was a woman who loved him deeply, genuinely. He was selfish. He used her heart, manipulated, lied, took advantage of her kindness. But before he could destroy her completely, she vanished. She went no contact, no warning, no explanation, never returned. He said, "Now I see why she didn't just leave me. God pulled her out before I could damage something I was never qualified to hold." She didn't wait for the final blow. She was rescued before it landed. Spiritual discipline means trusting the exit without needing closure. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is trust the silence. Trust the unanswered prayer. Trust the door that slams shut without warning. But real faith doesn't demand full understanding. It moves forward anyway. You don't need to know why it ended. You don't need to know what they said. You don't even need an apology. What you truly need is to trust that your protection was prioritized above your comfort. God removed you, not because you were weak, but because you were precious. Your absence became your salvation. The moment you disappeared from their life, they lost access to your loyalty, your grace, your light. They didn't notice at first, but eventually, when things no longer felt right, they realized something sacred had been withdrawn, and it was never coming back. And by then, you were unreachable. Not because you were hiding, but because divine protection is a one-way door. Once it closes, it doesn't reopen. Not for manipulation, not for half-hearted apologies, not for nostalgia. It only opens for truth. And by the time they're ready to be honest, you've already healed and moved forward. Your only job now is to honor the exit. You don't need to chase explanations. You don't need to re-enter a room God already pulled you out of. You don't need to fix what was never yours to carry in the first place. Instead, strengthen your inner peace. Guard your spirit like something rare. Stay aligned with your purpose, and respect the quiet exits God orchestrated for your growth. Because the ones who hurt you will one day realize what they lost. But by then, you'll be too far away to reach. And that isn't revenge. That is protection fulfilled. They didn't see it while they had you, because light never announces itself loudly. It just shines quietly, faithfully, endlessly. You were the calm in their chaos, the forgiveness they never deserved, the understanding they never earned, the steady presence that warmed their world without asking for anything in return. And yet, they threw it away. Why? Because when people are used to dysfunction, they confuse peace with boredom. And when they're addicted to control, they mistake gentleness for weakness. So they discarded you, believing you would always be available, believing you would come back, believing you would never discover your worth. But now, in your absence, reality begins to settle. The suffering doesn't arrive all at once. It starts in small, ordinary cracks they never expected. A conversation that falls flat because you're not there to carry it. A difficult day with no one to soothe them. A moment of fear with no calming voice to lean on. A personal achievement with no one who genuinely cares to share it. That's when your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. They scroll through old messages. They check your social media in silence. They think about sending a text, but don't, because deep down they know they broke something they can't repair. They won't admit it, but they feel it in a way that keeps them up at night. You were the one who listened when they didn't know how to express. You stayed when they pushed everyone else away. You gave and gave and gave, until they assumed your generosity was infinite. Now they're surrounded by noise, but have no real connection. They're surrounded by people, but no peace. They're in relationships, but feel utterly alone. They may post like they're winning, laugh like they've moved on, smile like everything is healed. But in the quiet moments, the ones they can't escape, they remember you. Not because of who they were with you, but because of who they will never be again without you. And why does that regret cut so deeply? Because it goes beyond simple guilt. This isn't just, I feel bad for what I did. This is spiritual regret, the kind that whispers, you'll never find someone like that again. They hurt the safest place they ever had. They lost their blessing, and it's not coming back. Guilt is about actions. Regret is about consequences. But silent regret, that's about identity. They're not just sad they lost you. They're shattered by who they became in order to push you away. And the worst part is, there is no way back. Emotional intelligence. Why your silence hurts more than revenge. They expected rage. They expected confrontation. They were ready for the argument, the accusations, the emotional drama. But you gave them none of it. You gave them silence. And that silence became a mirror, reflecting everything they tried so hard to avoid: the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation, the cowardice. Because silence doesn't defend itself. It simply reveals what words can't. And in that quiet space, they finally saw themselves clearly. Real life parallel. I didn't realize she was the last person who truly cared. A man once said, I broke up with her like it was nothing. I thought she was too sensitive, too emotional. I wanted someone who challenged me less. Now he finally understands. She was the only person who ever loved him without an agenda, without conditions, without trying to control who he was becoming. And he pushed her away because he thought power meant distance. He didn't shed a tear when she left. He didn't beg. He didn't chase. But 2 years later, that same man cried alone in a quiet room, successful on paper, surrounded by shallow people who only liked the version of himself he pretended to be. He confessed, now I understand. Losing her wasn't a single moment. It was a slow collapse of everything real in my life. And then it hits you. You were never too much. You were simply more than they could hold. They said you were too emotional, too intense, that you cared too much. But now they miss that intensity. Now they miss those emotions. Now they desperately crave someone who genuinely cares. You weren't too much, you were everything. The truth is, they just didn't have the capacity to receive what was pure. You were light in a world where darkness felt familiar. Your power? You didn't have to prove anything. You didn't chase. You didn't waste energy explaining yourself. You didn't try to make them understand your worth. You walked away with quiet dignity. And now they live with a truth they'll never fully admit. Your silence is louder than all of their excuses put together. Because once someone has experienced real peace, nothing else compares. And once they lose it, they never stop searching for it. You were kind while they were cruel. You gave endlessly while they took without remorse. You loved from the soul, and they used you just to fill a void. And when it ended, they walked away with a smirk, while you were left gathering the broken pieces of a heart they never intended to protect to the outside world. It seemed like nothing happened. No apology, no justice, no closure. But what the world doesn't witness, God sees clearly. He saw the nights you cried quietly, the posts you deleted, the texts you never sent, the pain you buried just so you could function. He saw the battle behind your eyes when you forced a smile in front of others. He saw the betrayal, the gaslighting, the manipulation, and when you thought no one would ever speak up for you, he took notes, not in rage, but with precision. Because God's justice doesn't move on your timeline. It arrives on his. The scales of justice don't rust just because there's silence. Just because you didn't retaliate does not mean they got away with it. God doesn't measure by public outcomes. He measures by private motives. They thought they escaped, but what they never understood is this. A delay of justice is not the denial of it. Sometimes God lets them believe they're winning, so when the fall finally comes, there will be no one left to blame except their own reflection. That isn't revenge, that is divine balance. Why does their life begin to unravel in unexpected ways? It's never dramatic. It's never instant. Instead, slowly, their relationships feel empty. Their trust collapses. Their reputation erodes in subtle whispers. Their confidence turns into paranoia, and suddenly there's a weight in their chest with no name. They can't explain why peace avoids them. Why does nothing truly satisfy anymore? Why does success feel hollow? Why does love feel distant and unfamiliar? It's not a curse, it's consequence. Because when you violate the sacred energy of a soul that meant no harm, the entire universe begins to reconfigure itself just to teach you. God doesn't avenge for entertainment. He restores for purpose. He doesn't hurt them to make you feel better. He humbles them so they finally have a chance to reflect. Because divine justice isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's revelation, a mirror they cannot escape. It's that moment, the morning they wake up and understand, I had something real, and I destroyed it. It's the instant they finally recognize that every prayer you whispered over them has now become the very protection you carry forward into your next chapter. But without them, spiritual discipline means trusting in invisible justice. You may never witness their breakdown. You may never hear their apology. You may never know how deep their regret truly goes. But justice isn't meant for your entertainment. It exists for your evolution. You didn't walk away holding proof. You walked away carrying peace. And that peace, that's your reward. Let God handle what they did. Let the universe echo the pain they caused. Let silence speak in the places where your voice never could. You don't need to broadcast your story to the world. God already wrote it in full. You didn't lose. You were preserved. While they were playing games with your loyalty, God was preparing something greater for you. While they laughed at your pain, God was building your next level. And when they finally fall into the very hole they dug for you, you won't even be there to see it. You'll be too far ahead, too lifted, too blessed to return to the place you were rescued from. Let unseen justice unfold while you rise in silence. Because the greatest act of spiritual confidence is this: to no longer need their apology, their explanation, or their downfall. You don't rise by dragging others down. You rise by refusing to sink with them. And when God sees that, He restores you, elevates you, protects you, because you honored His justice by not becoming like the ones who hurt you. There is a quiet kind of power that never appears on social media. No spotlight, no applause, no trending hashtag. It's the power of restraint, of not clapping back, of not matching their energy, of not becoming the person who wounded you. To the world, that looks like weakness. But to heaven, it looks like wisdom, because anyone can react. But very few can remain composed when every part of them wants to scream. Heaven watches what people ignore. When they mocked your silence, God was noting your strength. When they laughed while you cried, He was recording your faithfulness. They thought they got away with it, but God was quietly watching what you would do with the pain. Would you seek vengeance? Would you destroy them back? Would you betray your own soul just to feel momentarily powerful? You didn't. You chose restraint. And restraint is the language of kings. That's why silence is sacred in spiritual warfare. Your silence did not mean surrender. It meant strategy. It meant you refused to fight battles that didn't belong to you. It meant you knew, what I'm dealing with is not just flesh and blood. It's spiritual, and my victory, it doesn't need to be loud. You let God fight what your hands couldn't. You didn't block their karma by trying to rush it. You didn't sabotage your growth by chasing closure. You held the line. You kept your peace, and heaven took notice. The reward is not revenge, it's elevation. You may not always get revenge, but you will get restoration, and that's far more powerful. Peace that can't be stolen. Joy that isn't dependent on who stays. Relationships that align with your healed self. Opportunities that feel like divine compensation. Confidence that doesn't need validation. You'll look around one day and realize what I thought I lost is nothing compared to what I was being prepared for. Because God doesn't repay you with pity. He repays you with purpose. Let's look at a real-life parallel. There was a woman who was publicly humiliated by someone she trusted. She never exposed him, never fought online, never told the full story. People called her weak. 3 years later, she built a company, wrote a book, and found love that honored her. While the man stayed stuck in cycles of shallow validation, she didn't rise by revenge. She rose by resilience, and that's what restraint does. It builds your throne while others play in the mud. The most terrifying thing to those who hurt you is your growth. You didn't stay broken. You didn't stay angry. You didn't remain in the chapter where they left you. You became something untouchable. And now, they can't reach you, not because you're cold, but because you're healed. They expected your silence to be passive, but it was sacred. It was your shield. It was your sword. It was transformation in progress. God's greatest reward is not what you gain, it's who you become. In choosing peace, you became powerful. In choosing restraint, you gained clarity. In choosing not to fight evil with evil, you broke generational patterns. That's the reward. You didn't just survive betrayal, you became wiser, more grounded, more aligned with your calling. And now, you walk with quiet confidence. Not because life didn't wound you, but because it couldn't break what God was building inside you. So the next time they wonder how you're still standing, how you're still glowing, how you're still growing without them. Tell them this: I gave it to God, and He gave me back myself. You didn't lose. You were preserved. You were protected. And now you've been promoted. They hurt you, they walked away, and they thought you'd never recover. But what they didn't know was that silence was your weapon, and God was your witness. You didn't beg. You didn't break. You became unshakable. And now you don't even need to prove them wrong. Your peace already did. So, if you're walking this road, if you've ever been betrayed, discarded, or mocked for staying silent, know this: heaven has heard every silent tear. Justice is already moving behind the scenes. And your next chapter will not be written by the ones who tried to destroy you. It will be written by the strength you chose when you could have chosen revenge. If this message spoke to your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs this truth. Subscribe to Life Through Stoicism for weekly wisdom to help you master emotional intelligence. Protect your peace and rise with quiet power. Comment below: I choose peace over revenge. I choose growth over bitterness. Let the world know what side of the battle you stand on. Your silence is not weakness. It's spiritual discipline, and it will take you farther than noise ever could. The war is over, but your rise has just begun.